All right, so today's presentation is based on the Eternal Flames chapter of my work in progress, which is a cultural history of fire, the widespread practice of keeping flames burning perpetually for ceremonial or practical purposes has ancient roots going back well into prehistory. Oh dear. Now what? Oh, there we go. All right. Okay. For most people, the term eternal flame probably brings to mind the memorial flames that became popular in the middle of the 20th century. Here we see one of the first, which burns by the French tomb of the unknown soldier in Paris. There are now flames burning next to monuments to unknown soldiers in 12 European nations. Of the over 180 ceremonial flames around the world, about a half honor fallen soldiers or all war veterans, all victims of war, or notable war victories. So why keep an eternal flame? The superhuman longevity of fire can create an animated link to a community's past and its future. So reasons for doing so include to symbolize the unity and continuity of a family, city, or nation, to honor historical events or persons of significance, to commit to a goal or principle, or to represent the everlasting light of the divine. We'll see examples of all of these reasons coming up, but the oldest reason of keeping a fire alive is to stay alive. Before early humans learned to make fire, keeping it going was a practical necessity. Early humans needed it for warmth, protection from predators, and the cooked nutrients required by our expanding brains. Religious rituals developed to protect and maintain the sacred fire. Such rituals likely predated language. Here's this image. It's a little hard to make out what's going on, but this is from a wonderful film called Quest for Fire, which is about a group of humans, early humans, who don't know how to make fire. And so they carry fire with them as they wander around in a kind of a basket, which probably has scraps of bark or moss in it that are slowly embers that they can restart a fire when they get it to a new campsite. And in an attack from another group, they lose their fire. And so they send out 3 young men to find it. And most of the movie follows their adventures and difficulties in getting fire back. And and here they've come back and everyone is terribly excited. They succeeded in bringing back fire. They have fire again. And they're so excited that they managed to drop it in the water. But then they are rescued by a young woman who they have rescued, who knows how to make fire. So for those bands of early humans who succeeded at the task of keeping fire alive, as generation succeeded generation, the fire remained. Children learned to help tend the same fire their ancestors tended. As adults, they took over the responsibility for tending it, and then passed it on to their own children. The sense of communal ownership of a mystery likely inspired the idea common in many cultures that the spirits of ancestors live on in the fires they once tended. Among the Yakut of northeastern Asia, for example, an old man and woman sit within the hearth, representing departed relatives who look after their living descendants. The Lar Familiaris, a minor family god worshipped at ancient Roman hearths, represented the founder of the clan and all its deceased members. In many patriarchal cultures, a man receives a branch of the clan fire as an inheritance when he becomes the head of a household. It burns as long as he lives and is sometimes considered his second external soul. Elsewhere, family fires belong to women, and a Circassian bride receives fire from her in-laws after her wedding. She never let her fire go out throughout her lifetime, was high praise for a deceased Circassian woman. Some Mongolian nomads jealously guard their long-burning clan fires, never sharing it with outsiders, and believe their fire was first lit by Genghis Khan and the Shakyamuni Buddha. Okay, so sometimes fires burn for a long time out of practicality or habit. It was easier than having to light it again in days before matches. Fires in some Irish cottages are known to have been kept burning for over 400 years to no particular rule. There was no rule, that just happened. In southern, southern Brazil, a barn for gauchos, the South American version of the cowboy, as burned since before the family who owns it took over the farm around 1800. There was just never a reason to extinguish it. The practice of honoring ancestors with ever-burning fires continues in many cultures, even where there's no longer an open hearth. In Chinese traditional religion, families get a set of spirit tablets on an ancestral altar, arranged in hierarchical order. A lamp or candle burns beside the tablets, never extinguished, symbolizing the continuing presence of the ancestors. Some cultures sacralize the ancient practice of keeping fire alive. As cultures grew in sophistication, many set aside sacred, ever-burning fires separate from the fires used for more practical purposes. In ancient Greece, for example, every city-state had a prytaneon, a government building that housed the civic hearth of the goddess Hestia, whose external sacred fire symbolized the life and health of the community. The Romans had one temple devoted to Vesta, their goddess of the hearth, from the earliest days of their city. For close to 1,000 years, an order of priestesses known as the Vestal Virgins guarded the sacred symbols of the city, which the eternal flame was the primary. The safety of the fire guaranteed the safety of the Roman state. When the Gauls attacked the city in 387 BCE, the Vestals carried the sacred fire to safety in a jar. Indigenous nations of Eastern and Central North America used metaphors of fire to signify their identity as a people, their way of governance. Hello, could everybody mute themselves? Please, thank you. And the right to live where they live. About the year 1451, centuries before 13 American colonies agreed to create a central government, 5 indigenous nations based south and east of Lake Ontario agreed to cease warring and create a cooperative league. The men of every clan of the 5 nations shall have a council fire ever burning in readiness for a council of the clan, specified the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Great Law of Peace. All the clan council fires of a nation of the 5 nations may unite into one general council fire. The centrally located Onondaga Nation became the keepers of their grand council fire, which burned in their main village for at least 200 years. They ended up ceremonially extinguishing it during the American Revolution, when they couldn't agree among them, the different nations, which ones, whether to ally with the British or with the rebellious colonists. The Potawatomi Nation, whose name means people of the place of the fire, played a similar role to the Onondaga as firekeeper of the 3 fires, a group of 3 Anishinaabe-speaking people in the Midwest, along with the Ojibwe and Odawa. And then there's another one, the 7 council fires of Siouan-speaking nations in another part of the Midwest. So over time, the native fires became mainly metaphorical. Decades after the Haudenosaunee extinguished their grand council fire, they relit it from slumbering embers, quote unquote. Today, they govern themselves through council fires metaphorically burning at 3 levels: the village, the nation, and the confederacy. The fire-keeping traditions of the indigenous nations of the American Southeast can be traced to the Mississippian mound builder culture from which they descended. I will skip over a much complex history here to 1951, when a delegation of Eastern Cherokee, I keep swiping the wrong thing here, met in Oklahoma with descendants of the Cherokee who went west on the Trail of Tears. They brought back sacred fire to light an eternal flame in North Carolina. In 1984, runners took embers from this fire to ignite another eternal flame in Red Clay, Tennessee, site of the last General Council of the Cherokee before the nation became divided. Another eternal flame with a complex history long burned in Ireland. Around the year 480, at the site of a pagan shrine under a large oak tree sacred to the Celtic goddess Brigid, an Irish woman known later as Saint Brigid founded a Christian monastery. Whether the saint was born with that name or was later conflated with the pagan goddess is unclear, but in any case, she carried forward an ancient Druidic tradition of sacred fires. She established an order of women to keep the perpetual flame burning at Kildare, which comes from the Gaelic Kildara, the Church of the Oak. The sisters kept the fire burning for more than 1,000 years until Henry VIII dissolved all monasteries around 1540. After a hiatus of several centuries, the Brigidine sisters reformed and relit the ancient flame in 1993. The shot on the lower right shows it burning in a sculpture that incorporates imagery from both Christian tradition and the Druidic worship of trees, now maintained by the Kildare County Council. On the upper right is the restored rectangular ruins of Brigid's Fire Temple, and in the background is St. Brigid's Cathedral. Exactly why St. Brigid and the Druids before her kept the eternal flame is lost in the mists of time, but it likely symbolized the eternal light of the divine. In the case of the ancient Israelites, who wrote everything down, we know why. They had a commandment from God. The instructions that Moses received when establishing the tabernacle specified that the Israelites must prepare, quote, pure oil of beaten olives for the light, so that a lamp may be set up to burn continually. Tend it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a perpetual ordinance to be observed throughout their generations, unquote. The menorah held 7 of these Ner Elohim, lamps of God, continually burning before the Holy of Holies, first in the mobile tabernacle that traveled with the wandering Israelites, and then in the ancient temples of Jerusalem. The tabernacle disappeared when the Babylonians destroyed the temple, but many synagogues today keep what's called a Ner Tamid, the eternal light burning before or above the Ark of the Torah that contains a Torah scroll. Many Christian churches practice variations on this tradition, maintaining a red-colored chancel light or sanctuary lamp representing the light of God in Protestant churches. In Catholic churches, a presence lamp next to a vessel called the pyx or ciborium containing the Eucharist, the consecrated wafers believed to be the body of Christ, indicates and honors the real presence of Jesus. And even my Unitarian Universalist church in Berkeley has a sanctuary lamp hanging over its altar. That's the red thing there near the top of this image on the right. And hanging from that is a little statuette that looks like a statuette of a pagan goddess, and nobody can tell me how it got there. When the lamp was first set up in the early 60s, it was maintained by the Women's Guild, who every week hauled the lamp down and refilled the oil that it was burning, originally burned. But after a while, the women decided they had better things to do, and there is no more Women's Guild, and they replaced it with an electric light that is on a special circuit, that so that when the electricity goes out, it won't go off. And actually, many synagogues and other churches have an electric light in their Ner Tamids or sanctuary lamps, which is of course safer and easier to maintain. A fire in the Dashuin temple near Hiroshima is said to have been lit by a Buddhist monk over 1200 years ago. And fire from this flame was used to light the peace flame at Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, intended to remain lit until nuclear weapons are abolished. We might call this one a provisional eternal flame. Another provisional flame in Ontario will remain lit until a cure is found for diabetes. Laying flowers there are President Obama and the then president of Japan, Shinzo Abe, who was recently assassinated. The religion that places the greatest emphasis on keeping fires eternally burning is Zoroastrianism. For Zoroastrians, the earthly fire is a living, energetic manifestation of the presence of the supreme creator, Ahura Mazda. It also represents Manu Arthra, the eternal spiritual flame within. Its continuous burning symbolizes wisdom and light, opposing ignorance and darkness, and such timeless ethical principles as honesty, order, beneficence, and justice. As Zoroastrians became the state religion of successive Persian empires, 3 legendary great fires or royal fires grew out of the regnal fires that burned while a king lived. They reached their greatest glory during the Sasanian Empire, the last empire before the Islamic conquest in 1651. Housed in a sumptuous palace, the Adar Ghaznap, one of those 3, burned at the end of a series of rooms through which pilgrims passed in increasing awe, like subjects coming in the presence of their king. The fire shown here, descendant of one of those great fires, had to be kept secretly in an obscure desert town for 700 years before it could be rehoused in an appropriately grand firehouse, as they call them in Zoroastrianism, in a more tolerant era. Only members of a hereditary priesthood may enter the inner sanctuary of an Atash Baram, which is the highest of 3 levels of Zoroastrian eternal flames, to serve it with deep reverence. Priests cover their mouths with masks when they approach the fire so as not to pollute it with their bodily secretions, as they add sandalwood and logs stripped of bark using polished bronze implements. Once established, sacred fires must be kept going forever, if at all possible. Some Taoist temples have a uniquely thought-provoking take on never extinguished fire. A lamp on the central altar, symbolizing the light of the Tao within, never gets extinguished. The lamp also never gets lit, since the light of the Tao remains unaffected by cycles of creation and destruction. I love this twist on the concept of unextinguished fire. Your fire will always remain unextinguished if you never light it in the first place. Let's see, moving from the sublime to the ridiculous, many strange legends have grown up around eternal fire. Authors from antiquity, for example, wrote frequently of indistinguishable lamps that inexplicably burned for long periods of time. Reports told of ancient tombs in which lamps burned for centuries. Pagan cultures around the Mediterranean often did seal a lighted funeral lamp into sepulchres to aid the deceased on their journeys in the hereafter. A lamp sealed into a Roman tomb in 444 BCE reportedly still burned after a millennium and a half in 1540. Those entering the sepulchre believed that by opening the door, they had caused a draft that blew out the light. A naturalistic explanation points out that newly opened tombs often emitted fumes resembling smoke, residues of the gases of decomposition, and suggested that explorers finding scattered lamps when they enter a chamber probably assumed that the lamps were the source of the fumes and had burned until they had entered. The details of some stories do not permit such explanation. However, in one, when an explorer opened an ancient tomb in England in the 1600s, an automaton in the shape of a man in heavy armor guarded a bright lamp hanging from the ceiling. When the explorer stepped on certain stones on the floor of the tomb, according to historian of the occult Manly Hall, the mechanical man rose to his feet and struck the lamp with an iron baton, completely destroying it, and thus effectually prevented the discovery of the secret substance which maintained the flame. Alchemists claimed to have devised secret formulas for substances that would burn forever. This sort of stuff used to languish in obscurity in old books about the occult, but the proliferation of websites and cable TV shows about ancient mysteries creates demand for such material, so old stories get trotted out again, tricked up with modern graphics. There's another strange story. It took place as traders, settlers, soldiers, and tourists traveled west along the Santa Fe Trail in the mid-19th century. The ruins of the Pecos Pueblo, 80 miles east of the Santa Fe, New Mexico, provoked questions. Who built this impressive structure? Why had they abandoned it? Romantic legends grew up about the place. Many 19th century stories viewed the vanishing Indian, quote unquote, with a romantic sense of tragic loss, like the last of the Mohicans. The mysterious but easily accessible Pecos ruins provided a convenient stage set on which romantic fantasies could play out. They told of a legendary Indian hero who somehow acquired the name of Montezuma, the Aztec ruler who lived centuries before. The sketch on the left, made on a military expedition during the Mexican-American War, is labeled Ruins of Pecos Aztec Church. At the time, all ruins of unexplained origins in that part of the world were attributed to the Aztecs for some reason. Montezuma had actually grown up in Pecos, the story went, but centuries earlier departed to the south to found the great cities of Mexico. As he left, Montezuma commanded that a fire be kept continually burning until his return. The people of Pecos kept the fire going faithfully for centuries, but the effort to do this, in particular, the need to feed human babies to a giant snake that guarded the fire, caused the Pueblo's depopulation. The illustration on the right was inspired by a version in which an old chief and his beautiful daughter, the last of the fire tenders, were seen standing on a roof at dusk, gazing to the east, wistfully hoping for the return of the hero at last. This version ended with the death of the beautiful daughter in the arms of her betrothed and the flame of Montezuma mounting to the sky. None of this had any basis in actual Native American history or mythology. In a version published in 1929, the Vestal Virgins somehow found themselves transported to New Mexico from ancient Rome. According to this version, when Montezuma left Pecos, he lighted a sacred fire on the sun altar and commanded that this fire must be fed and kept burning continuously day and night by 12 virgin daughters of the headman of the Pueblo. The Pueblo prospered until one night one of the virgins fell asleep and let the fire go out. The virgins were made outcasts, but the Pueblo, accursed because of their failure to maintain the sacred fire, had to be abandoned. Several natural substances can burn steadily enough to produce perpetual fire, including abiotic methane, peat, natural gas, and coal. Fire can smolder underground in coal seams and layers of peat for centuries. On the right is the summit of the oldest known fire. It's called Burning Mountain in Australia, which has been burning, they estimate, for over 6,000 years. The fire is actually 30 meters underground, moving south at about 1 meter per year. It's only visible on the surface as a warm, discolored ground. In northern India, natural gas flames in a cave inspired the creation of an elaborate Hindu temple over fires that burn continually with the power of the goddess Sati. When Sati's dismembered body fell to earth in 51 parts, and I won't explain why she fell to earth with 51 parts, but her tongue landed here at Jwalamukhi, flame mouth, creating a Shaktaput, or power spot. Another sort of semi-form of a natural fire is the result of industrial accidents. Thousands of inextinguishable coal mine fires burn around the world. At least 67 burn in the Indian state of Jharkhand, one of which has burned since 1916. In Germany, Brennenderberg, which means burning mountain, there are in fact 6 different burning mountains around the world, has attracted tourists since its ignition circa 1668. 45 burned in Pennsylvania. The most famous one there started in 1962 under a town called Centralia that had to be abandoned when a young boy fell into a sinkhole that opened beneath him and vents of steam began spouting from the ground. While drilling in Turkmenistan in 1971, Soviet geologists tapped into a natural gas cavern, opening an enormous hole into which their drilling rig disappeared. Authors decided to avoid dangerous fumes by burning off the gas. Though they hoped this would take a few days, the fire they set has burned ever since. For most of history and prehistory, keeping a fire alive was a labor-intensive process, requiring dedicated fire tenders and a steady investment in fuel. That changed when a Dutch scientist invented gas technology in the late 18th century, greatly simplifying the task of keeping a fire going. In 1904, he was honored in Maastricht with a statue that incorporates an eternal flame in the form of a gas pipe torch. I hope you can see that the torch there that he's holding is burning. Let's see. Besides honoring the victims of war, flames also honor, remember, or promote national independence for those who fought for it. Such calamitous events as the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, the Indian Ocean tsunami, 9/11. There's even one now for COVID in Spain. The hope for peace, or the search for a cure for some disease, or assassinated leaders. There are 3 for JFK, 1 for Martin Luther King, and 1 for Prime Minister Rabin of Israel, and others, quite a motley crew here of Gautama Buddha, Che Guevara, Elvis Presley, and Jerry Falwell. Let's see, eternal flames may have been a side battle for a while during the Cold War, or perhaps there was an eternal flame Olympics going on, because the United States leads the world in the number of eternal flames with more than 50, followed by Russia with 37 and 79 in Europe as a whole. We humans tend to vastly overestimate our significance in the context of eternity. Alive for such a short time, from our myopic perspective, anything that might last a generation or 2 before or after us seems to qualify as eternal. A better term might be perpetual flame, which suggests something that might last for an indefinitely long period, but sidesteps the hubristic declaration that anything we create could last for all eternity. The Virgins, for example, kept their fire going for a millennium, which is certainly a long time, but it has now been a millennium and a half since the Christian Emperor Theodosius extinguished their fire and disbanded their order. Here we see the ruins of the Temple of Vesta in Rome, known as the Eternal City. The ancient hearth is visible in the bottom right foreground. The ruins are actually a restoration created under Mussolini. Just to underline perhaps this point, the stepping back for a moment to consider the true meaning of eternity. Even the big flame in the sky will not burn forever. In about 5 to 7 billion years, a large dying sun will engulf the earth and all its combustible material, then sputter out and die. The universe will still last many trillions of years more, according to some current hypotheses, before reaching a point of heat death or zero thermodynamic free energy. That would be the end of time, so arguably the end of eternity. The amounts of time involved in true eternity, however, go so far beyond the human scale that perhaps we should be forgiven for thinking of fires that last more than a few generations as eternal flames. Let's see. Eternal flames kept in public places may suffer from the vagaries of weather, the attacks of enemies of whatever the flame symbolizes, the clumsy or malicious acts of visitors, or the shifting priorities of those charged with keeping a fire going. A few months after assassinated President John F. Kennedy's widow, Jacqueline, lit an eternal flame by his grave in Arlington National Cemetery, a group of overenthusiastic Catholic school children managed to put it out by sprinkling it with holy water. A guard relit it with his cigarette lighter. Sometimes, though, even extinguished eternal flames can prove inspirational. When the pop rock band The Bangles visited Elvis Presley's grave in Memphis, they found the eternal flame there extinguished by the Tennessee rain. While a punk rock group might have found such a situation ripe for irony, the Bangles were inspired to write a hopeful love song. Eternal Flame became their greatest hit. Setting up a flame to burn forever asks a lot of future generations. It presumes they will respect the significance the establishing generation invests in it and accept responsibility for its maintenance. Here on the left is a more recent shot of the statue of the inventor of gaslighting. After its gas torch had burned for over a century, the Maastricht authorities made the flame available only on demand via a coin-operated machine. Another sequentially eternal flame, I guess. A Finnish monument to seafarers lost at sea originally included an eternal flame at its top, but stiff winds off the Baltic kept blowing it out. An apt reminder, perhaps, of the forces of nature that cost the seamen their lives, but the Helsinki authorities eventually tired of relighting the fire and decided to let the statue honor the sailors' Sol's flame. Some of the shortest eternities commemorated by solemnly lit flames burned for political reasons. East Berlin had an eternal flame extinguished soon after the reunification of Germany in 1990. Upon gaining independence in 1991, Estonia put out an eternal flame established during Soviet times. After overthrowing the democratically elected government of Chile, General Augusto Pinochet lit what he called the Llama de la Libertad, the eternal flame of liberty, in a public monument in Santiago. During Pinochet's 17-year dictatorship, the flame survived several attacks by opponents of the regime, including one pictured here. In 2004, when Pinochet was about to stand trial for human rights violations, tax evasion, and embezzlement, it was quietly removed during a remodeling. The dominant interpretation of the meaning of libertad had changed in Chile. The shortest living of all, perhaps, was an eternal flame erected in 2000 by President Slobodan Milosevic of Yugoslavia to protest the NATO bombing campaign the previous year, which had forced an end to the Kosovo War. Only a few months later, Milosevic, soon to be prosecuted for war crimes, was overthrown and his eternal flame extinguished. The Serbs have since cleaned the monument up and rededicated it, but the flame remains extinguished. Some flames persist long beyond reasonable expectations. In 1357 in eastern Switzerland, a man accused of murder offered to atone by maintaining a flame for eternity in the local Catholic Church. Failure to provide oil for the church lamp would result in the forfeit of his land. Though the land changed hands many times over the next 6.5 centuries, each successive landowner honored the obligation, supplying nut oil at first and then candles to the tune of about 70 Swiss francs a year. Finally, after 655 years, a new owner refused to pay for the candles. The church sued, but in 2013, the cantonal court ruled for the farmer. The laws valid at the time of the original pledge had long been null and void, it decided, and no real link remained between the land and the eternally filled burning candle. Residents of the town continue to keep the flame burning, though exactly what it now represents is unclear, aside from inertia or the persistence of tradition. The degree of emphasis on the physical continuity of eternal flames varies considerably. Zoroastrians place great store on the continuity of their reverently tended, eternally burning flames. Native Americans think spiritual continuity more essential than physical continuity. In many other cultures, continuously burning fires get periodically interrupted intentionally. New fire rituals in which fires are ceremonially extinguished, then relit from a pure or sacred source, are among the most common customs in the world. They frequently overlap with the practice of maintaining eternal flames. Such fires could be called sequential eternal flames. The Vestal Virgins, for example, ceremonially extinguished their fire each year on the 1st of March, the Roman New Year, and lit a new one from a sun or fire sticks. Catholic and other Christians who keep a lamp perpetually burning before the vessel that normally contains the Eucharist extinguish it every year on Good Friday to symbolize the absence of Jesus. It remains unlit for 3 days until the night before Easter, when the paschal candle gets ceremonially relit. Orthodox believers wait in the darkened church of the Sepulchre in Jerusalem on the night of the Holy Saturday for their candles to be mystically lit by God. New fire ceremonies, common around the world, are an important subject in their own right. Much as many eternal flames sacralize in early stage in the development of our species before we learned how to make fire, new fire ceremonies sacralize the next stage when we did learn this crucial skill. The most spectacular was the Aztec version. Every 52 years, all the fires in their empire were extinguished and then relit from fire made on the body of a human sacrifice on the top of a mountain. I discuss that and other new fire ceremonies in the following chapter of my book. So, lest this discussion of eternal flames begin to seem interminable, I will now draw this presentation to a close. And thank you very much for your attention.